Good evening and welcome to Talk Local. I'm Greg Mercer and I'm glad you could join us. We've got an interesting show this week. We're talking about two issues that could both affect our region's waterways, but for very different reasons. One has to do with a man-made pipeline and the other is caused by Mother Nature herself. First, we're examining new plans for Line 9. That's the 40-year-old oil pipeline that's part of a controversial project environmentalists say endangers Ontario's farmland and its drinking water, not to mention our very own Grand River. Although you may not know it, the pipeline runs through our region. It cuts a line across North Dumfries Township. And now, the pipeline is about to undergo construction to reverse the flow of oil and increase the volume it carries. The plan's opponents say that puts Line 9 at greater risk of leaks. In the show's second half, we'll talk more about our local waterways, but from a different angle. Specifically, we're talking about the potential for flooding this spring. Given the heavy snows we've received this winter, that is a very real threat. We will hear from the Grand River Conservation Authority, a local police officer who handles emergency planning, and a regional manager who looks after our drinking water resources. Of course, we always want to know what you think about what you're hearing on the show. You can reach us on Twitter at TalkLocalWR. You can tweet me directly at Mercer Record. Call us at 519-893-6905 or email us. And the email has been dropped. But let's get to it. Line 9 has been running through Waterloo region since the 1970s, and yet for years we've rarely heard about it. That's changed in the past few years when a plan was proposed by energy giant Enbridge to reverse the pipeline flow, sending Alberta oil eastward to refineries in Ontario and Quebec. It also wants to increase the volume of oil running through the pipeline from 240,000 barrels a day to 340,000 barrels a day. Sorry, 300,000 barrels a day. We're joined by Louisette Lanteigne. She's a local environmentalist, and you spoke at the Energy Board hearings into this issue, and we're glad you could join us.
Thank you. Yes, I participated in both the phase 1 of the project, which goes through Waterloo region, as well as phase B. Ironically, there is no such thing as Enbridge phase 2 or Enbridge phase A. These labels were actually given by Enbridge for a reason that is beyond me.
Can we zero down on what your concern is with the pipeline, what's being proposed?
Well, yes. We actually, there were quite a large number of interveners who participated in this process, who are not affiliated with any particular industry, but were there to represent concerns regarding structural integrity issues, treaty rights, a whole host of issues in regards to the structural integrity of this pipeline. One of the issues that surfaced as a commonality amongst us all was the fact that Enbridge limited the actual review to only the area of the pumping station itself, negating 98% of the pipe that exists away from their pumping station.
Right.
And so we wanted to get that data included as part of the review. So that was a big part of our motions. Another part was the fact that there was no Aboriginal Crown consultation in regards to the approval of the pipe when it was installed, or in regards to this upgrade. So we're trying to engage Aboriginal communities with the government to come up with a strategy so that should anything happen on their reserve, their interests will be reasonably protected. They have to have a say. This is their territorial lands by way of claims that have predated this pipeline, and that needs to be respected.
So that's the process, but specifically, what is the concern with what they want to do with this pipeline?
Well, currently, we were hoping that by way of the NEB process that we could secure what's called a hydrostatic testing.
Okay.
Now, what that means is that it's a water test. You put water through the pipe at 1.5 the amount that they anticipate the pressure to be, because that'll give us a good safety threshold for the pipe lasting a reasonable length of time for the duration of the lifespan, safely, if it functions appropriately. Right now, what Enbridge is proposing to do is use a device called a pig.
Okay.
It goes inside the pipe and it looks for flaws all along the internal area of the pipe. But what we're seeing as a trend is the damage is happening from outside in. And we're seeing cracks, we're seeing corrosion, we're seeing flaking issues, which are wearing the pipe's thickness down from the outside in, which will affect how the pressure of the pipe will respond. Okay, because if the pig goes through and doesn't find the damage, these crack clusters can still manage to get their way down to the point that it will rupture if exposed to certain pressures. According to Enbridge's own data, we have several areas that will basically cataclysmic ruptures if they go at 720 psi, 620 psi. Enbridge wants to send oil through at 1,000 psi.
Well, that brings me to my next question. A lot of people might be asking this pipeline has been here for 40 years. What's the problem with a slight change in direction? Why is this suddenly a concern?
Well, the thing is, metal breaks down over time. And the force of the oil being blasted through at a level that has never been experienced by this pipeline before poses a risk no matter what the age of the pipe. But in this case, we're dealing with what appears to be a very fragile system. We're noticing that there are crack clusters that are happening in extremely high numbers, particularly around the Ottawa Valley area. The stretch that goes from Halton to Cardinal, for example, has over 600 anomalies in that area alone. And we're very much concerned because it's a seismic risk area identified by Natural Resources Canada. This is where earthquakes take place. So, and we're noticing that the high incidences of pipeline integrity issues correlate to the earthquake risk. So let's plan that in as a mitigation strategy.
So what happens now? The pipeline has been approved. The National Energy Board has said, we're okay with this. Is this a done deal?
They haven't. It's not a done deal by a long stretch, because this is what happened. They permitted the liquid to reverse flow.
Okay.
But they have not approved a condition called leave to open. Leave to open is required if you want to turn the pipe on. It has been out of service for a number of years and it has been under repair. And when they turn the pipe on, they have to do a brand new application from scratch. Now, this is where the process gets interesting, because leave to open mandates hydrostatic testing. It mandates that you have to have a maintenance of 97.5 structural integrity of the pipe. There are certain criteria that have to be met. And so although they allow the reversal of the flow, those conditions have yet to be addressed because they haven't even begun that application yet.
Right. We're going to have to pause there. We're going to go to break. We'll be right back. We'll talk more about this issue. Welcome back to Talk Local. I'm your host, Greg Mercer, and we are continuing to talk about Line 9, an oil pipeline that runs through our region that has been getting a lot of scrutiny lately. And we've just heard from a local environmentalist, Louisette Lanteigne. Right now we want to bring another person into discussion, a gentleman by the name of John Goudy. He is a lawyer from London, Ontario, who represents a group called the Ontario Pipeline Landowners Association. And thanks for joining us, John.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me on.
John, first, off the top, can I just ask, your group, who is it? Who makes up this Landowners Association?
It's primarily agricultural landowners that own property and use property along Enbridge's pipeline corridors through Ontario. And it's primarily agricultural landowners because most of Enbridge's pipelines cross agricultural land rather than other sources of land.
And I know it's difficult to sum up because this is a broad, complicated issue, but can you say in a nutshell, what are some of the things they are concerned about with the plan for this pipeline?
Well, the primary concerns that landowners have about Enbridge Line 9, and not only Line 9, but Line 7 and Line 8 that run alongside it through part of Ontario, the primary concern is pipeline integrity. What is the state of the pipeline? Is it safe to operate currently? Is it going to be safe to operate with the proposed changes? And that concern extends or translates into another concern, which is about integrity digs. And it's become clear as part of the Line 9B reversal and Line 9 capacity expansion project that Enbridge is not in a position to operate Line 9 safely without conducting hundreds and hundreds of integrity days. It's no longer a pipe that is out of sight and out of mind, especially for landowners, because they're having to face Enbridge coming in, construction crews coming in on a regular basis to dig the pipe up, repair the pipe, check the pipe, disturb the soil, throw it all back together, and walk away. So that's another concern landowners, and in particular OPLA, the Ontario Pipeline Landowers Association, had for this project. And another concern related, again, to integrity is whether Enbridge is financially capable of dealing with a rupture or a spill on this pipeline. It's not a concern just about this particular project. It's also a concern, even if this project wasn't being undertaken, it's a concern about Enbridge's ongoing operations, because we know from the experience in Michigan with Line 6B, Enbridge's insurance coverage for its entire system was not sufficient to cover the cost of cleanup of that one single rupture. So it's a concern to landowners, and I think it's a concern to other parties, as was expressed at the hearing process, including the Ontario Ministry of Energy. It's a concern as to whether or not Enbridge is financially capable to deal with a disaster situation, let alone multiple disasters in the same year. And in fact, if you take a look at the decision that the National Energy Board prepared, there were 3 members of the National Energy Board panel, and one of them dissented on the issue of Enbridge's financial capacity and didn't accept that Enbridge has demonstrated that it does have sufficient financial capacity.
So where does that leave landowners? If Enbridge is legally required to clean up any spill that might happen, you're saying they may not have the money, so where does that leave us?
Well, if Enbridge doesn't have the money, if Enbridge's shareholders don't have the money, it's a good question as to who's responsible for cleanup. There's a very recent decision out of the Ontario court where a landowner, an owner of a property who is not responsible in any way for the contamination that was on that property and had extended to other properties, was ultimately held responsible for the cleanup costs by the Ministry of the Environment in Ontario, and the court upheld that. So for landowners, they're extremely concerned not only about the possibility of having contamination on their land at all, but the liability that comes with that contamination, because if Enbridge isn't sufficient to cover the cost of cleanup, landowners may have that cost attributed to them.
In the case of Line 9, we know that the insurance is covered for $684 million. The problem is with the infrastructure running through downtown Toronto, where a single home costs over $1 million, how far is this money really going to go if we reach a disaster point? We have municipal water supplies all along the way, reliant on these water bodies for their municipal water. Manufacturing sectors rely on it. There's entire communities dependent on the Grand River, for example. We have Six Nations, Brant, Waterloo Region. So the amount of the cost is enormous. It goes beyond the $684 million. What we have seen in regards to the Kalamazoo spill is that the taxpayers foot the bill. The taxpayers are left with the bill. And we're also seeing a trend in the United States showing how oil companies are profiting from spills. They claim both the insurance money, they also claim the money from the state for the cleanup, and they actually make a profit.
John, getting back to you, I wanted to ask about, if I'm a landowner with a private well, who's responsible for testing of my water if the pipeline is running in my land? Who does that?
Well, unless the pipeline company agrees to do it voluntarily, it would be the landowner that would be responsible for testing its own well. I'm not sure that I've seen any easement agreements between Enbridge and its landowners that require Enbridge to do any sort of testing on well water.
landowners, they only do the assessment once every 5 years. For in-creek pipeline structural integrity, there's flybys once every 2 weeks. And what we're seeing now is data is coming in showing that the amount of people who are private citizens reporting spills is higher than the number of corporate fines of these leaks. So the public is basically responsible for finding the spills for the most part.
We'll have to leave it there. And John, just very quickly, the company raises the point, well, this is good for the Canadian economy. Do you folks take issue with that? Do you disagree with what they're saying?
Pipeline landowners generally don't take an issue with the existence of pipelines, the need for pipelines, the economic sense that pipelines make. The issue they take is with where the pipelines were constructed, how they're operated, and how landowners are treated in Enbridge's and the operations of other pipeline companies. So it's not that landowners are necessarily anti-pipeline, although I'm sure most of them would rather not have any pipelines crossing their lands at all. It's a question of whether or not those pipelines are being operated in a way that protects landowner interests.
Well, we have to leave it there. I'm sorry we've run out of time, and it's so short, John, but we appreciate you joining us to at least give us a glimpse about what this issue means to your group and your members, and thank you for calling in.
No problem. Thank you.
We'll be back in a moment.